Thank you very much. And I know it's late. This is our last, but certainly not our least. So Dr. Newby-Clark is a professor and chair in the Department of Psychology at the University of Guelph and past president of the society. He received his Ph.D. from the University of Toronto in 1993 and his Ph.D. from the University of Waterloo in 1999, with a focus on social psychology and methods of statistics. His research now focuses on flow of consciousness, especially daydreaming, and how descriptive psychology can inform and facilitate its study. He also continues to explore the power of descriptive concepts and conceptual tools. For challenge and recreation, he enjoys skiing and continuing his journey of becoming a licensed glider pilot. As I spoke with him about his introduction, I noticed an interesting parallel between his experience of learning descriptive psych and learning gliding, both of which he started within the past 5 to 6 years.
Yeah.
Notably, he demonstrated courage in both instances. Regarding descriptive, he presented at the conference shortly after learning about EP. Regarding gliding, it clearly takes courage to fly an unpowered aircraft. Another notable parallel is that the gliding club he joined happens to have a broad range of expert pilots, including 4 fighter pilots.
Yeah.
While our society is also comprised, in modesty I might add, a broad range of experts. His co-presenter, Grace Colp, who received her BA honors with distinction in psychology from the University of Guelph in 2023. Her current work is focused on theoretical psychology, with descriptive psychology as a particular point of emphasis. She plans to attend graduate school in psychology, and in her spare time, she enjoys being in the great outdoors, hiking and kayaking. And last but not least, she is a recent winner of the Green Shoots Award. The title of their presentation: What does it mean to be mistaken about behavior potential?
Thanks very much for that introduction. And this is going to be a hybrid presentation. We think it's going to go well, but you never know, right? And this is Grace joining us from Belleville, Ontario, which is close to Kingston.
Hello.
Grace, yeah, right. Okay, so just the beginning slide here, we're going to talk about behavior potential. And as anybody who's been talking to me for approximately 30 seconds or more knows that I am a glider pilot. So we have cameras at the club and they take pictures of what's going on at the club. And this is kind of a standard day at the club, somewhat early in the morning. And this is our clubhouse. And this is usually what our clubhouse looks like, because you might notice that there aren't any planes in there. So people do tend to choose more behavior potential over less, or so I hear. So they're not in the clubhouse. Advance for me, this is the plan. They're in the hangar. So the hangar doors are open and the gliders are being taken out. This is a typical summer morning as we're getting ready to fly. Those of you with sharp eyes might also notice that there's my good buddy Ned there sleeping on the sofa because he decided to catch a little bit of extra sleep after a night shift before he went flying that day. Again, obviously, choosing more behavior potential over less. So with that, I'll introduce us. It's what does it mean to be mistaken about? I'm going to move you around a little bit, so you're not going to feel a thing. Can I move her? Yeah. You should be able to just. Well, Charles is going to help me. Sorry. If you do like a little bit lower, it probably won't interfere with much. There. Yeah. Oh, there. Yeah. Okay. Here we go. Yes. What does it mean to be mistaken about behavior potential? And I'm Ian, and this is Grace, and we've already been introduced. So without further ado, I'm going to throw the floor over to Grace. As soon as I point the slide, there it goes.
Hi, so this is kind of an overview of what we'll be discussing today. Just as a reminder for everyone, the way that we see behavior potential and the way we'll be discussing it today is the tautology that a person will always choose more behavior potential over less. And so we're kind of going to go into the 3 aspects of behavior potential, how tautologies are useful, what it means to be mistaken, and being mistaken about behavior potential as a parsimonious account of the sunk cost fallacy, as well as bystander intervention. And we have a little highlighted circle around here on the plane. This is called a yaw string, and it is to ensure coordinated flight, that your tail of the plane is centered, and so it's not like leveling off to one side or the other. And that will come back up of how we are mistaken in behavior potential. I've learned a little bit about gliding over this course from Ian here, so we'll definitely use some good examples regarding gliding and flights today. So to start us off, the three aspects of behavior potential that we will discuss. This includes the correlative of reality and reality constraints, a person's status, as well as a person's behavioral possibilities as a consideration in its own right. And we will dive into those a little bit more.
Right. And we grabbed those three aspects off of the descriptive glossary that I'm forgetting who made. CJ Stone made, which is just incredible and helped us a lot doing drill downs on things. So next is thanks, because it's a joke. Sorry, we're moving you around again, Grace. There we go. Yeah, it's a picture of the planet Earth. I knew it was worth it. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about reality and reality constraints, and remind us of a little bit about the difference between the real world and reality constraints, which is certainly a distinction that we hold near and dear to our intellectual selves in descriptive. So, and I'm actually going to kind of uncharacteristically read from notes to make sure I get this right. So, whatever else they do, our representations of the quote-unquote real world codify our possibilities and impossibilities for behavior. In contrast, the notion of reality is directly the notion of those possibilities and impossibilities as such, with emphasis on the latter, i.e. reality constraints. So, and then we go into, so basically the world as you understand it, and the possibilities and impossibilities that you're acting upon in your world versus what is actually the case, for lack of a better phrase, the reality constraints, what could occur, not occur. And so we can think of the dog example. There's Ollie, my mini golden doodle there, just after grooming, looking very nice. So we can consider what can be done with the dog present. This is a very old example for those of you. Those things are possible if the dog is present. They are part of the real world for you and me, provided the dog is present. But if the dog suddenly vanished from the universe, no dog-related possibility would be available to us or anyone else. No fetch, no walkies, etc., except the various ways of bemoaning the loss of dogs. The absence of dogs would be a reality, or reality constraint. Okay. Or as Paul Zeiger once said, reality is the totality of all constraints on the deliberate actions of persons, which may be very much different than what you believe to be the case about what your constraints are, the difference between the real world and reality, which is allowing for the possibility of being mistaken, which is what we're going to be going into in this talk. Okay, so now I'm gonna, oh, and there goes Ollie because he disappeared.
Poor Ollie.
Yeah. Okay. People, anybody who's ever had any kind of flight training of any kind you're not allowed to answer this question, okay? Okay. So, how do planes fly? Lift? Yeah, well, where does lift come from? Joe?
It's the Bernoulli effect, creating vacuum above the airport, above the wings.
Right, and how does that occur?
The air has to go faster because it goes over a curved surface. This is, it has to go faster, it lowers the pressure.
Right.
You got lower pressure above than below the wing.
Lower pressure above
So it
than
pushes it up.
below. And how does that lower pressure above and below occur? How does that happen to occur?
You're flying through the air at a certain speed.
Right.
But that's the speed to the curve of the wing.
Curve of the wing?
Yeah.
Right. Okay, so then how do planes fly upside down?
I don't know. I've often wondered that.
Yeah. So the curve of the wing is definitely an aspect, but we can actually have wings that are almost fully symmetrical with respect to their structure. It turns out that yes, it is the Bernoulli effect, although people don't quite understand exactly how that happens, which is, so if you ever want to freak someone out on the plane, you go, no, we don't exactly know. But it turns out that it has to do with something called the angle of attack. So what is the attitude of the plane? Because you can actually have a very well-designed wing, and if you change the orientation of the plane to a steep attitude, as I can do in a glider, sometimes on purpose, sometimes by accident, I can go past something called the critical angle of attack, and I can actually stall the plane. And if I'm in a turn in a slippery glider, I can then induce a spin and start spinning down toward the earth very quickly. So we're trained on how to get out of those, which is why I'm here today. Okay. Yeah, so that's an example of our worlds and our understanding of how things work in the world and what the possibilities are versus what the reality constraints are. In this case, a possibility that we didn't really think about or contemplate because of our miscontrol of the way things are. In other words, example of being mistaken. Okay, there's Ollie back, because that was kind of neat. Okay. And there's Ollie contemplating the existence of bunnies. We were at a cottage and Ollie spent a lot of time looking at these rabbits, like, why can't I go out there? Okay. Okay, Grace.
All right, so the next aspect of behavior potential is going to be a person's status that we're going to look at. And so when we discuss a person's status, it is a person's place in any domain or scheme of things. So we look at this as a kind of identity, who you are in the world and how you perceive yourself in the world. This status could be social standing, relationships, friendships, self-worth, as well as religious beliefs. These will all affect a person's status in the world. And it is a way of talking about a set of relationships simultaneously where you can account for all these variables. Someone's status will greatly affect their reality constraints, as well as behavioral possibilities, which we will see further here as well.
Okay, good.
And so moving on to a person's behavioral possibilities. This is the key piece to what we're discussing today. And when we look at someone's behavioral possibilities, we're looking at the thinness and thickness of these possibilities. And so when we describe thinness and thickness, that is similar to the value of these possibilities. So a thicker possibility will have higher value, whereas a thinner possibility will be of lower value to the person. And so when you are looking at possibilities to make a decision, one will be thicker, and that is what we are always choosing. That's the tautology that we're looking at, that these higher value possibilities, these thicker possibilities, will always be chosen over the lower value or thinner possibilities. And people's thickness and thinness, or their perception of what is thick and thin, changes dramatically based on the person's status, reality, the reality constraints. And so, for example, if you are religious, your religion will definitely affect values that are thick and thin compared to someone else's religion. A really good example that we found, if anyone is a Star Wars fan or has seen the movies, in the movie, Darth Vader goes to, it's a spoiler, no one's seen it, but in the movie, Darth Vader goes to Luke Skywalker and says that he is his father, trying to convince him to come to the dark side. And Darth Vader saying this, it is because he believes that this family tie is a very thick option, a very valuable possibility. And for Luke Skywalker and his perception of it, that family tie is actually very thin. So it's kind of demonstrating the different perceptions that people are going to have of the thinness and thickness of values. And kind of in the meme that we have up here.
I'm getting back to it, sorry.
No worries. The meme we have shown up here is join the dark side, we have tacos. Because, for example, for Luke Skywalker, that family tie, that information was very thin and it didn't work the same way that Darth Vader was hoping. But possibly if he offered him tacos, that might have been thicker for Luke Skywalker because of his values that he has in life. And so this will greatly affect people's decisions, essentially, of looking at the thinness and thickness.
We had Grace in on this, but I think you just covered everything, right? Great. Yeah. Exactly. All right. Okay. So one of the more interesting things that I ran into when I started reading up on descriptive psychology was this idea that, and I've never just thought about it before, that tautologies can be extremely useful in understanding the physical world or the world of persons. And it was when I read Ray's, Okay. When I read Ray's article, which was the letter from Sir Isaac Newton to psychologists, and some of the mistakes that we were making, and some of the things that we could learn from his adventures in the birth of what I think we consider to be classic physics. And And Ray in Newton's voice said some really interesting things about the nature of Newton's laws. And in speaking about I'll take the third law as the best example. So the third law is, for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. If you were to observe a situation in which you're not seeing an equal and opposite reaction to an action, you don't say to yourself, oh, well, Newton was probably wrong about that then, wasn't he? It's probably not a good move. What instead you say is, there must be some auxiliary things occurring here that are limiting, that the law holds, but there must be some other things that are occurring that make it appear as though the law is not holding right now. In other words, you don't abandon the law, you use other explanatory mechanisms to make sense of what's going on. And if you think about, for example, Osorio's reanalysis of frustration aggression, which Ray also talks about with respect to provocation and aggression. Was it provocation and aggression? I think that's right.
Oh, the provocation of hostility.
Yeah, provocation and hostility. If you're not seeing hostility resulting from provocation, Osorio argues you don't abandon the law, you introduce some auxiliary unlesses, right, to make sense of what's going on. Much like Newton would do, or his contemporaries would do, or we would do, if we're not seeing an equal and opposite reaction. It's the same kind of idea, and you can actually get a lot of explanatory use out of tautology, although traditionally in psychology we're told never ever do anything that, never make a proposition that you can't disconfirm. That's but obviously that's not the case, and it really kind of did open my eyes to the different ways of doing science. As usual, Ray is, opening my eyes and being brilliant as usual. Okay, so, and as I mentioned, Osorio in clinical topics does a similar thing with behavior potential. He continues to insist to his students in those conversations. Some of you probably were there in those conversations, right? You are unidentified, but nonetheless you were there. A lot of you. Osorio says that people will never choose less behavior potential over more, and then people were bringing up possible counterexamples, and then Osorio saying, well, actually, no, this is a tautology, we're running with this is the law, so now we need to make sense of what actually was going on. What did the person believe to be their behavior potential? And things of that sort to sort out, even to the point of talking about someone's suicide and how that makes sense in using the tautology. And so just to point out and remind us that the tautologies are extremely useful in making sense of things. And Grace and I think we found a couple of instances in quote unquote mainstream social psychology in which we can use this tautology to make sense of what's going on, and therefore we argue have a more parsimonious account of what's taking place in two quite disparate domains. Grace, did I leave anything out on that one?
No, that was good. I liked the lead up for what we'll be talking about with those applications.
It's all working out famously. That's good. Okay. Okay. So, what does it mean to be mistaken about potential? That's what it says. Okay. You want me to move her again? Yeah, move her again. We got two.
Sorry.
No. No, it's not yours first. It's not yours, So next time, Grace, if we do this, we're gonna have to design the slides so that you can be up in the corner.
Maybe I'll be in person next time.
So we're coming back here next year, I think, so, yeah. There we go. So it must be the case with respect to what we've been talking about here and where I've been leading up to, that one way we can talk about someone being mistaken about their behavior potential is that a person's world can be dissimilar to what the actual reality constraints are, dissimilar between the real world as constructed by the person, their understanding of their possibilities and impossibilities, versus what reality is and what actually is possible and impossible. And when Grace and I were talking about this over the summer, when we're talking about gliding, was that this must always kind of be trivially the case, right? It must almost always be trivially the case that there have to be some sort of difference between people's real worlds and reality, because we make mistakes, we can't see everything, we're not omniscient, etc. But sometimes you can find some regularities with respect to how people's constructions of their worlds are at variance with what is actually the case. And so that's where we think the mistakes are coming from. So a person believes they chose more behavior potential over less, but in some sense, with respect to reality, they in fact did not. So one way of saying this is we're arguing that one way of rephrasing the behavior potential maxim is people always choose what they believe to be more behavior potential over less, not actually what is more behavior potential. Choose, exactly. Yeah, choose. Yes. Well,
in the context of addiction, I remember Pete presenting just a very simple framework, choosing short-term certainties versus long-term possibilities.
Short-term certainties versus, and that certainly came up in a lot of our discussions. Absolutely, as one possibility, and certainly we see that in all sorts of different realms in human behavior. And there's also obviously, so we might have some arguments with the heuristics and biases folks on some of the things that they've done over the years. But one thing I think that they've made abundantly clear to us is that we are all limited in capacity, and sometimes we're going to be making choices that we believe to be the best because that's what's presented to us, and we decide that's good enough.
The significance dimension is probably vital in making that part of an intentional action, which is what the person believes they're doing by doing the act in question.
Right,
and they're that particular about later, long-term versus short-term, all those kinds of things fit in as an alternative to talking simply about values.
That's a really good point, Lynn, actually. I was going to say something about that. Can you say the first part again?
Oh, that if you look at the intentional action parameters, one of the key ones is what the person is doing by doing the act in question, the significance of the behavior. And when you ask about the significance of the behavior is always going to be the significance of the person either maintaining or improving what they take to be their position in the world, which is another way of talking about choosing more behavior potential over less.
And I think that's actually Grace and I didn't talk about that all that much, but I think that's extremely relevant. I think to both of the examples we're going to share today, because we're going to be talking about probably both, because we're going to be talking about a social practice and status, which I think is very much related to people when they're talking about what it is that they're doing when they're doing X. I think that that's going to be an important consideration. Okay, next slide. Oh yeah, and there's the plane upside down again, just to remind us. Oh, it looks really cool. All right, hopefully next summer I'll start going upside down, which will be fun. Okay. I know, it's a little nutty. Okay. Right, Grace.
All right, so next we're looking at the examples of how we are mistaken about behavior potential. So completely leading off of what we just discussed, the way that someone believes that they are always choosing more behavior potential, but are mistaken in that, we can use sunk cost fallacy and bystander intervention and similar social phenomena to help piece together how we are specifically mistaken. So these social phenomena explain that something is happening within human behavior, but then behavior potential can actually be that key piece to identify specifically how that is working and how it's playing out. So people may fall victim to sunk cost fallacy, which the fallacy explains, but behavior potential we can see why that's happening and how that's happening for the person in respect to a person's status, the thickness and thinness, and their realities. Those all play major parts in explaining that.
Great, and we're running very good for time, so we can definitely dive into these, and we'll explain. Well, the two of the pictures are obvious. One of them might not be obvious, but we're going to explain this as we go on. Okay, so first, sunk costs.
So sunk costs fallacy, I am pretty sure everyone is quite familiar with these social phenomena, but just in case to kind of reiterate it, the sunk cost fallacy is when a person is reluctant to abandon a course of action because they have already invested in it, whether that is time or money. And even when it is clear that abandonment will be more beneficial, they choose to pursue the course of action still, and that is because they have already invested in it. So what we have here is the ski ticket study. This is the most common study discussed when looking at sunk cost fallacy. And what the study is it presents patrons with a case study essentially of a scenario where they have booked 2 ski trips, unfortunately for the same day, and they are non-refundable. So they have to pick which one to go on. Ski trip A, they have paid $100 for. Ski trip B, they have paid $50 for. However, what the key difference is that the more expensive trip has poor reviews, and they're certain they're going to have less fun on that trip. Whereas the cheaper $50 trip has really good reviews, and they're certain they're going to have fun. So the question is, which trip do they decide to go on? And the average person will typically choose the more expensive trip because they spent more money on it. They want to get their money's worth. In reality, the sunk cost fallacy is coming into effect because the total of $150 has been spent and is non-refundable. You will not get that back. So no matter the trip that you go on and the enjoyment that you have, it costs the same amount for you. So this is how the sunk cost fallacy is coming into effect, because people not recognizing this will go towards whatever their cultural maxims in this case would be of not wasting, of not wanting to waste that money that they've spent already. And so this sunk cost fallacy is a really good example to show behavior potential, how people, when they're making choices, it seems like it is the thicker option of more value to choose the trip they spent the more money on. And so for them, that is explaining why they have made that decision and why it's more beneficial for them. However, the sunk cost fallacy, and we use behavior potential here to see how they are mistaken about that specifically. And so the sunk cost fallacy explains the mistaken portion of that, I find.
Right, and to expand on what Grace was saying, this effect is seen with respect to money, time investments, any other kind of real or figuratively existing. That's a terrible phrase. Anyways, so people stay in movies when they're terrible, right? Because they want to get their money's worth. That's an example of it. Or finish the bad meal, or the examples go on. And for some time, and this is where it becomes important for us to consider, and where some empirical data are actually relevant here. For some time, it was thought that non-human primates and then other animals besides actually also exhibited the sunk costs fallacy. It was called the Concord fallacy. I'm forgetting why it was called that now, but it turns out no, that's not the case. It seems to be something that persons do only, as far as we can tell so far. Also, it looks like it's something done by more so by adults than by children as well. And those are actually some clues that Arts and Faust use to start to construct the argument that what's going on here with the sunk cost fallacy is, as Grace said, what we would call a social practice of not wasting. And if you think about the language, getting your money's worth, right? There's some sort of a it doesn't make any sense if you think about it, because the money's already gone. But it does strike one as people who are kind of abiding by that maxim of not wasting. And actually, this gentleman pictured with this big ball of twine, that's actually the biggest ball of twine in Minnesota. Yeah. And there's a Weird Al Yankovic song called "The Biggest Ball of Twine in Minnesota," which involves a family venturing out on the highways and byways of Minnesota to go and admire the biggest ball of twine in Minnesota, and there it is there. And the gentleman who actually, and I'm forgetting his name now, Grayson, what's his name again? Francis, that's his last name, Francis. He said that he did this because his mother told him he should never waste anything. So kind of an extreme example.
Then it became intrinsic.
Exactly. Intrinsic, and he just Christ. So from one perspective, it doesn't make any sense for people to commit the sunk cost fallacy, because it looks like they're choosing less behavior potential over more. They're foregoing enjoyment. But if people highly value, erroneously in some sense, but highly value the social practice of not wasting, if this is part of their world, then it does start to make sense to us. Yeah, Tricia.
One of the ways I hear this fallacy discussed most commonly is in respect to marriage or relationships.
Yes.
Yeah.
And when we're talking about going to the movies or eating a crappy meal, that's one thing. But thinking about the significance and the sunk cost of time in a marriage or relationship, that changes the plane, right?
Yes, it does. It really, yeah, it really does. And there, you know, some good therapy or a good friend might come in handy to do some reframing, not thinking about, you know, well, all those years would have gone to waste then if I leave. That's right. So a behavioral economist, they can get a few things wrong and maybe overplay their hand a little bit. But one of the things that they do talk about is we should always make decisions on the margins. It's not how much money you had that should drive your behavior, it's how much money you have right now. That should drive your behavior. So that's, and so we think that Arts and Faust actually made very good sense of the sunk cost fallacy, and it actually is reflective of the tautology of behavior potential. People always choose more behavior potential over less. So, well, we'll move on and we can circle back to the questions. Oh, I get to talk about this bystander intervention. So, raise your hand if you've never heard of the bystander intervention effect, or Genovese, or okay, fine. All right, so we like this is standard social psychology, right? That if there's someone in duress, the likelihood of them getting assistance is much higher if there's one person walking by versus 5 people walking by. In fact, the probability of them getting assistance goes down radically, exponentially, as a function of the number of people who are actually present, right? And there are a number of explanations for this, and Grace is going to go into the details about this, but it's an established fact, and sometimes there are unfortunate examples that have come up in the news of people, you know, walking by someone who's dying in great distress or what have you, ignoring attacks. I don't like to talk about the Kitty Genovese example as the seminal. It's a seminal example in the sense that it started Latney and Darley's research program, but it's actually a terrible example. Because when you look into it, it turns out there's probably a lot more going on there than we knew about at the time, including that Kitty Genovese was gay, and there might have been people looking the other way. Nonetheless, we do know that when someone's in duress, those situations are unusual for people, very ambiguous, and if there are a lot of people standing around, the chances of them getting help start to go down quite quickly. Grace.
And so these specific examples that Latane and Darley have identified are 3 different psychological processes that are preventing people from helping others in distress. And so these 3 different ones are diffusion of responsibility, evaluation of apprehension, as well as pluralistic ignorance. So more simply, we're kind of looking at fear of being publicly judged, fear of making the situation worse, and also the ambiguousness of who to help, of it not being put directly on you, it could be put on anyone. And so the way that this is going to tie into behavior potential when we look at it is the role that status and reality constraints are going to affect the bystander perception of their decisions. So if someone's status is going to be high anxiety and they are very fearful of making a situation worse, that means that the option of helping is actually going to be much thinner than a different individual who perceives life much differently, has lower anxiety, has very good experiences with helping, and it's proven a good in their brain where they want to keep doing that. So that person is going to have much different view on the values of possibilities than someone with anxiety or other disorders. And so something that has been looked at quite a bit actually is the assigning status to people. So there's studies that look at someone in distress and they assign status to an individual by calling them out in the crowd, identifying it, like putting it directly on them. And that has seen great improvement in getting people to help. Once their status is changed and it's being put on them, that possibility becomes thicker for them and they choose to help.
Yeah, I saw that. Sonia?
Oh, I was just made aware of some studies on that same issue where people are now even more inclined to stop and videotape.
Oh, yeah.
Stop it.
Videotape. Yeah, with their phones. Yeah.
And I think something interesting, I don't have anything to back this up, but I think what's interesting on that is that may even be, obviously in some cases it is quite selfish and whatnot, but possibly subconsciously there's a way of them thinking that this is helping, of maybe it could be recorded for evidence later, and that would be interesting to look at for their value if it is coming out of somewhere negative, or for some people maybe that is their way of helping with their perception.
Right, and so Grace, I was noticing that Sonia had her hand up. Have you talked about the assigning of status to helpers?
Yeah.
Right, yeah, because that really does work. If you're ever in duress, point at somebody and say, get an ambulance. And you're assigning them a status. And I mean, I can't guarantee that they're gonna go ahead and do it, right? They can decide to reject the status, but the ambiguity of status in these unusual situations that can be ambiguous themselves just by their nature, people can get hurt. So it's important to do that. You can also add, is there a doctor in the house as well?
But what about the exceptions of like natural disasters or like 911 when people just then threw themselves into helping roles?
Oh, that's really interesting. Well, I mean, one cute way of solving that is to say that no one was a bystander. Right? They were actually victims of it in one way or another, right? And if you think about 9/11, for example, it was, so there was no ambiguity. And so if you like, something really bad was happening to people, and obviously there was a lot of help needed. And people with assigned status acted, immediately at risk to their own lives as well.
So the status is, this too is happening to me, not
Yeah.
to somebody.
I think for a lot of it, I think for a lot of it, Jeff.
It's also a little like the story about, you keep hearing about the porpoises that push the person to shore. You don't hear the story about the ones that just went the other way or pushed the person out to sea.
Yeah,
And having known people that were in and around some of those buildings, 9/11, a lot of people just ran, and helping was a wonderful thing, but it's still what a person takes in some fashion to put themselves in a better position, given the significance to them of the circumstance.
But Ian, I think your point is the firemen went up the building.
They did.
And they have
Yes.
the signs.
They had the assigned status, and I think a lot of people self-assigned that date, but to Wynn's point, not everyone.
Right.
Yeah, Joe.
There's an additional thing going on. If you point at somebody and say, get an ambulance, yeah, of course, you've changed their status temporarily, but you've also engaged in the social practice of calling for help.
Yes, right.
Move one makes it difficult for move two to not occur.
Right.
Specifically, what are they gonna do? Say no?
Yeah.
Then they're engaging with different social practice of refusal to help, and that's quite different.
Right, and then that's a really good point. And then if you think, so then you can think about a good Samaritan law as actually being move one.
Being what?
As being move one, right?
Removing a reason not to help.
Exactly. Yeah, an obligation to help in many states, or all states, I don't know. Yeah, but.
I think
Yeah.
additionally, something to look at is the person's status. So even if we do move into the refusal of help and go into there will be individuals who, because of their status and their reality, actually do refuse to help. And it's important to consider those individuals, because that is an absolute behavioral possibility. And for them, they are still choosing more behavior potential, but it is just because of the status and reality that you have to dig into to recognize how they are mistaken in that way.
Well, they're not mistaken, they're affirming their status.
Affirming.
Morally, That's a different issue.
Right.
But what you've also got here is if you use the judgment diagram, by looking at what the person actually has done with this kind of formulation in mind, you're looking for a way then to see how their particular configuration of values, what's of particular significance to them in some reformulation is how they view the circumstance. And I'm not going to jump in and protect this person because I got two little kids right behind me. There's an infinite array of possibilities, but what the formulation actually involves is some basic concept of that behavior is motivated. There's a reason for doing something. And the fundamental reason is that the person believes from their perspective, the action, and that's why I think perspective and status helps, will put them in a better position, will either maintain their status, their position in the world, or improve it. And so the broader concept of status, the summary formulation, which is what behavior potential, broadly speaks of. These are equivalent terms: behavior potential, status, and the easiest way to get to it, I think, is to think more about this particular significance of the act that you actually see.
So do you think it's sometimes just the ambiguity of the significance itself? When, like, what would I be doing by doing this?
Well, it may not be something you can identify and speak about. People are often reluctant to identify what's of significance to them. I know I'm a psychoanalyst. I'm supposed to believe that there's a lot of this is unconscious. I think very little of it is unconscious, but I think there's a lot of ways in which we are reluctant to speak about or even to confront what we actually do find as significant, but we walk the walk.
Right, that makes sense.
So it's kind of the business of, look not just at what I'm saying, but look in summary at what I'm doing. Look at the action itself as an action. And as an action in a social practice, as an action in a social practice that has particular significance and meaning to me, even if I'm unable or unwilling to describe or to even identify in my own terms, I'm willing to share why I've done what I've done in the question. It's kind of like the last talk. We said, let's talk about the things that you're reluctant to talk about sexually. Okay, maybe not.
We'll never know the extent of what is being discussed. Like it's the unknown knowns and that whole part that comes into play.
But still, you've noticed an action that appears to have some significance. And so you at least start with the way it seems. It seems like you're being a coward, but well, maybe you are, in a manner of speaking. But maybe you're protecting other interests.
Yeah. I think we're kind of nicely sliding into the Q&A, right?
You got 17 minutes.
We have 17 minutes. We don't have to do 17 minutes.
That's true.
Isn't it the case though with the judgment diagram that it isn't so much that you use it to plan action, it's just a way of trying to understand it after the fact? Like from the observer critic mode as opposed to the actor mode?
That's
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, it's not a process. It's just a way to map out what actually happened or what appears to have happened. And that's why there's also some ways the technical formulation that I build involves the aspects of the circumstance the person can easily identify, those that they're reluctant to identify as such, and those that they may be unable to identify as all formally logical possibilities that will guide the behavior. But for the most, and with different degrees of ease at changing one's mind, and where deliberate action is more likely to be the case and where you're not likely to get deliberation or negotiation.
Well, that's
the judgment diagram is really helpful here.
Yeah, well, that's really good because that maps to real world versus reality constraints, right? That by doing that. Yeah.
Errol has a question.
Yeah, I just wanted to say I really appreciate the sort of openness that you guys have to sort of re-exploring some of these concepts. And I just wanted to add that, for the sake of discussion, I think it makes sense to include in that evaluation of thickness and thinness, how we understand behavior to be reinforced or punished, And I think that it's important to consider that if the punishment for a transgression or a mishandling of a certain kind of a situation is high, that can also influence the decision making, in addition to a person's general appraisal of their own ability. It's sort of like if it seems too risky to the risk and reward sort of counterbalance each other in that too. So it's not merely, I mean, having an increased behavior potential is one possible reward, but if the weight of the decision is counterbalanced by a perceived and sometimes ambiguous kind of state of risk, that could also tip the balance, and it wouldn't necessarily be clear quite even to the individual that they were sort of.
Harold, this is where the classic judgment diagram helps, because you'll notice in the classic drawing there'll be 4 lines, and the 4 lines will involve hedonic, prudent, aesthetic, and moral, ethical, or ethical as perspectives. It could have more, but it's the reminder that that's what's gone into the judgment is the perspective, is the full range of perspectives the person has available. And so that's going to, the punishment versus the pleasure, all these things are going to be built into a manner of making use of versions of the judgment diagram to suss out, what was going on. Precisely as you just described.
I think an interesting part of that as well is going to be the fluidity of how someone's status in reality can change, and depending on the environment and different things that are coming up, those aspects do change given on what's going on.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. Even kind of harkening back to the previous presentation, that some of these things are more dynamic and situation relative to the given context, as that is a changing set of circumstances, then naturally the relationship to it would change as well.
This is an uncomfortable self-revelation. I'm going to do it for the public good.
Okay.
Hey, you have jumped in.
I killed a man just to watch him die.
I spent a good bit on a pair of shoes that never really worked on me. I mean, I just kept trying them, giving them one chance and another, and no, they never qualified as Colp. I'm enjoying wearing these shoes, but I kept them. And I've kept them, and I've kept them, and I've kept them. Clearly sunk cost type thing. The other day, I decided, oh no, I'm gonna tell Kathleen, let's give these to Goodwill. What prompted it was my having bought these 2 pairs of Spanish shoes, fluchos, by the way, check them out, which are excellent.
What are they called?
Fluchos. You can buy them around here, but I got some in Spain as well. And they are beautiful shoes, extremely comfortable, and I'm very proud of them. Having made that really good decision, of which I am proud, now I'm ready to discard the other shoes. So it takes us to my shame over having spent
A certain amount.
that I was covering.
Yeah.
And now that I am restored in my capacities as a competent shoe buyer, I am willing to take this step and to discard these shoes. So.
Bravo.
Okay.
It was my hope for you that was not overwhelming shame.
Well, I think it also goes back to, I think, some things that I talked about in my presentation, that you can let some things go if you have some things to take their place. But if you don't, it's also a lot harder to take it. There's a different take on it, and maybe more superficial or something. But, we were talking about intrinsic interests, and the more you have, you can't do certain things, you can have others to replace them.
Anyway, I'm very competent. I'm very conscious of myself at this time as a competent shoe buyer, and I'm proud of that.
Excellent.
And that is what has provided the platform to discard these shoes.
I'm sure we can all find examples in our own lives.
In closets.
in closet.
What we need is a support group.
Hoarders Anonymous.
So, yes, Nancy had a point, yes.
I think sometimes it's a high wire act
Uh,
in itself. It's a moment thing. And I have also an example of this man, maybe in his 90s, crossing the street like this. And it was a busy street. And he was coming towards my car. And I thought, oh my God, what am I gonna do? Because if I stop, I'm liable to have people behind me crash into me. And then if I keep going, he's so vulnerable. So it's like, and it's been haunting me since this happened. He made it across. I slowed down enough that I put my foot, you know, but it's all a matter of like all these instant judgments that you need to make. And he made it across. He couldn't get up the curb. I mean, he was so, yeah, he couldn't. I mean, it was so horrific. With 2 bags of groceries, my heart was breaking, but there was no way that I could have pulled it over, and I was going through all these things. And it's just, you know, it's 9/11 in some ways, you know, like, what do? You know, and it's all a matter of that making those judgments instantaneous.
Well, and so, you see, sometimes when I talk about bystander intervention in lectures or with people and things, I talk about the couple times I saw near drownings. And how the first time when I was a kid, I saw how people reacted. And so the second time when I saw one, I knew what to do. And so this is kind of outside of the talk in some ways, but I think it might be something to think about for people to share these stories. She went to, but still. Share these stories of situations that they witnessed and they wish they'd acted in a certain way, or thank goodness they acted in a certain way and stuff. Because I think one of the fundamental challenges, and Latney and Darley talk about this too, with these kinds of bystander intervention situations, is they're thankfully comparatively rare, and they can be ambiguous. Like sometimes it's not. Your situation wasn't ambiguous, but we've also run into situations. Well, listen, years ago with the kids, we ran into one where we had no earthly idea what was going on. It looked like an attempted robbery, but we actually didn't know who was the rightful owner of something and who wasn't. And I was also thinking, is someone going to pick my pocket? Like, is this staged? Like, and it was all happening in seconds, right? And so it might be something, you know, to consider talking about this with other people, so we can have a better sense of how to act when these things unfold. Yeah. And there's a great story that we couldn't put in, but I'll put it in now. There was a Cornell student some years ago who, and you knew this was going to happen at one point. He was walking back from his social psychology lecture. And if those of you who know Cornell know there's like a wooded area that you can pass through by a ravine, and he saw someone who was just about to jump. But he'd just been in the bystander intervention lecture. So he managed to injure. Yeah. But it's a fascinating topic. But anyways, I think I'm out of time.
All right,
We got 5 minutes, but yeah.
To build on Charlie's point, I think when you're presenting this to other people, other than this sort of audience, I think it's really important when you're presenting that, people will not choose less behavior potential over more, is to make it clear that is an observer critic perspective, not an actor perspective.
Oh, that's good.
Because when people hear the person will not choose, or he's choosing behavior, he's choosing behavior potential, and they're going to get caught in that. When in fact, it has nothing to do with what an actor is choosing. They're not choosing behavior potential. They're choosing to intervene in a situation or not.
Right.
And so along with that idea, I worked a lot in universities, and the idea of trying to get people to not be bystanders in situations, and particularly sexual assault on campus, things like that, always got ground down to, well, how can we get them to go from being bystanders to doing something? And the discussion about status always came to mind for me. And I tried to get them to stop treating it as bystanders versus participants. you are a participant if you are an observer of any kind.
Right, yeah,
And the fact that you know that something is going on, you are now participating. So now you have a choice of how you will participate.
Very nice.
I like that, yeah. We should probably rename the Bring in the Bystander program, which is actually a sexual assault resistance program
Mhm.
in Canada. Because it may inadvertently be making an erroneous status assignment.
Yeah, you know, to follow up with what Hap's saying, that a lot of literature on bystanders during, like in Germany, and so in the Holocaust, is calling bystanders passive, and it does the same, creates the same problem, it's supposed to say, what is this person doing by doing that, and then you get all kinds of different answers. Like, yeah, I like what the Germans, the Nazis are doing, I hate the Jews, or my God, if I step in, they're gonna shoot me, you know, or shoot my family.
Right.
You know, or, and then there's even versions of the opposite, somebody actually stepping in and flipping the whole perspective around. A woman whose doctor was being, you know, beaten by one of the Nazis, you know, as a quote, dirty Jew, and she intervened, and the soldier said, "How dare you intervene?" She turns out and says, "How dare you do this to a prominent member of my community?" All of a sudden, the whole perspective changed, the community changed, and the soldier left. I mean, he was threatened in a sense by all of these people.
We call that chutzpah.
It's making great, you know, once you have someone do that.
We have Sonia, with her hand raised.
Oh, Sonia,
Fair.
Go ahead, Sonia.
you're muted, Sonia.
Still muted. There you
Yeah,
go.
okay, did you call me?
Yes.
Paula and I, in a workshop 4 times a year to undergraduates at DU in her business ethics, legal studies and business ethics class, we teach the judgment diagram, and we teach them all 4 perspectives. And then we give them examples over and over. And the bystander one is one of them. Walking by somebody drowning in a pond is another one. And we make use of the idea of what Ian was just saying, that, you know, the first time you go by somebody who's drowning, you might not know what to do. But if they encounter that again, they've thought about it. So we make use in trying to teach them the value of the different perspectives. Another maxim is that you acquire concepts by practice and experience. So we tell them we're not going to come away with the right answers out of this workshop, but you're going to have some ways of practicing and using the concepts in such a way that you're going to be better prepared to encounter them.
Yeah, we got a minute left.
1 minute. And of course, that's a classic example from a philosopher who I'm forgetting is, you know, talks about the drowning, you're walking by and there's a person drowning. Yeah.
Any more comments or
Charles
questions?
Taylor.
I wanted to comment that descriptive psychology seems to be in very able hands with Grace.
I agree.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much for the kind words, everyone. This is my first conference, and it is an honor to have it be with the society. I just discovered the society this past year, actually, and I don't take this lightly. It has changed my life. It's opened up a lot of pathways, and it's changed my perspective on everything. So I'm just honored to be here and a part of this society now.
You come in
Very well presented, very well presented.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
everyone.
You want to make any closing comment?
Oh, we're gonna close the comments.